right, welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are diving back into the world of leadership today, picking up where we left off with Marcial Almeida's work. Last time we introduced him, and this time we're going deeper, focusing on his book, Empower Your Team.
Yeah, we've got some analysis notes here that we've been looking at, really trying to pull out those golden nugget of wisdom about how to empower teams.
Exactly, and that's really the mission today. It's not just like summarizing the book. It's about finding those actionable takeaways that you, dear listener, can implement in your own work and leadership. And also, we want to highlight just how much Marcial Almeida offers. There's the book, of course, but also his Curso de Liderança para Transformação e Inovação, which is like a course that spins off of these ideas. And then, of course, he offers consulting, too.
Oh, yeah, that course, Curso de Liderança para Transformação e Inovação, it's really comprehensive. The overview talks about everything from, really transforming how you think about leadership to the science behind it and the practical application.
That's what I like to hear, something we can actually use. And that's what we're going to do in this deep dive. Go beyond theory and pull out those impactful ideas from Empower Your Team. Ideas you can really sink your teeth into. So where does Almeida begin?
Well, a good place to start, and something that Almeida really stresses, is the whole concept of transformational leadership. This is like the engine behind any really meaningful change. You need that to make things happen.
I see. And the course materials actually bring up this really compelling analogy attributed to Plato about leadership being like leading people out of darkness, towards the light or towards truth. Sets the stage for the kind of impact we're talking about here.
It does. And from what I gathered, the book Empower Your Team really digs deep into how leaders create that light. Like, how do you build that shared vision that guides the entire team? Because without that clear direction, empowerment can end up being kind of aimless.
Right. You need that North Star, that shared goal. Now, the course, it's got a nation called Fundamentos de Liderança Transformacional, which delves into how leadership shapes the evolution of an organization. And it asks you to think about leaders who've actually pulled off big, successful transformations. What comes to mind when you think about that?
Well, it's interesting because having a strong vision is essential, like we said. But Almeida, he goes beyond that and emphasizes that it's also about how you go about it. And that's where Empower Your Team gets really cutting edge, especially when it comes to leadership and neuroscience.
Neuroscience. Okay, now that's interesting. I see here the course mentions a module called Liderança em Neurociência. Enfoque revolucionario. So tell me more about how those two connect.
Well, in that module, and I think this is reflected in the book, Almeida draws on the work of people like Daniel Goleman, his work on emotional intelligence, which we've talked about before, and also Daniel Siegel and his research on how being self-aware actually shapes your brain structure. And this is where it gets really cool. It suggests that really powerful leadership starts from the inside. You have to lead yourself first.
Aha. So it's not just what you do on the outside.
Exactly. Understanding how our brains work, especially under stress, that's not just an academic thing. It's crucial to how we influence people and how we create real change. So, for example, knowing how our amygdala, the part of our brain that processes fear, reacts to threats, well, that can help leaders manage their own stress and, maybe avoid accidentally triggering fear in their team. That's what creates a safer, more empowering environment.
Wow. That really shifts the focus. It's not just about managing others. It's really understanding the human element at play. Okay, so we have transformational leadership and we have neuroscience. So how does Empower Your Team make those things practical, for everyday actions?
That's the key question. And the course actually gives a great example, running meetings. Almeida sees the ability to run a truly efficient meeting as a direct application of those transformational leadership principles in action.
Efficient meetings. I think everyone listening can relate to wanting more of those. What's the advice in Empower Your Team? And I guess reflected in the course.
Well, Almeida breaks it down into 5 key principles. First, you got to start with a really clear purpose. Then be decisive, keep things moving, prioritize impact over just being present. And always wrap things up with clear action items.
Those sound like the ingredients for a productive meeting. Let's break down each principle.
Okay, so starting with a clear purpose, seems obvious, but you'd be surprised how many meetings happen without one. If you don't know why you're meeting, you're just wasting everyone's time. And then being decisive and swift, that goes with the idea of a leader who makes good decisions, processes things effectively, and makes the call. No need to keep rehashing things that are already settled.
Keep things moving. I like it.
Exactly. And then focusing on impact over just being present, that's about really thinking about who needs to be there. If someone doesn't have something concrete to contribute, let them use their time somewhere else. It shows respect for everyone's time. And I think this is really important, that ruthless prioritization. We always talk about inclusion, which is great, but sometimes being more selective can make things way more efficient.
That makes a lot of sense. And that last point, closing quickly with action items, that ensures the meeting actually leads to something, right? Not just talk.
Exactly. Summarize the decisions, assign responsibilities, set deadlines. That transforms talk into action. And it fosters accountability, which is huge. The main idea here is efficiency. You're driven by clear goals and a focus on what matters. That's good leadership in a nutshell.
So mastering meetings isn't just about saving time. It's about showing those core leadership qualities. Okay, what other nuggets of wisdom does Empower Your Team have for us?
Well, building on this idea of leadership in action, Almeida probably talks about the leader being like an emotional mirror for their team. That connects back to Daniel Goleman's work on emotional intelligence.
An emotional mirror. I like that. What does that look like in a team setting?
Well, think about it. A leader's mood, their emotions, they're contagious. If they're calm and collected, especially when things are tough, the team is more likely to stay focused too. But if the leader is anxious or unsure, that spreads like wildfire. It just erodes everyone's confidence.
It's like they set the emotional tone for the whole team.
Exactly. And real transformational leadership, it doesn't come from, barking orders. It's about embodying that shared purpose, the one that resonates with everyone's values. Remember that light we talked about?
Right. Leading from within, not from above.
Exactly. Our brains are wired to look for patterns, and leaders, by being consistent with their behavior and emotions, they set those patterns for the team. That's a big responsibility.
It really shows how important a leader's own emotional intelligence is. What else does Empower Your Team focus on in terms of effective leadership?
Well, a crucial one is self-awareness. The course emphasizes this a lot, and I'm sure the book does too. They even have a self-assessment checklist. It's called Checklist de Autoavaliação. Seaco su líder egocéntrico. Basically, it asks, am I an egocentric leader? It's a pretty powerful tool for looking inward.
A checklist. Those could be really eye-opening. What kind of questions does Almeida include?
Well, it covers a bunch of important areas, like, do you make big decisions without asking your team? Do you get defensive when someone gives you feedback? Do you think you're the only one who can handle those really important situations? Do you have a hard time delegating? Do you tend to blame others when things go wrong? Do you dominate conversations in meetings and talk more than you listen? Do you need to be the center of attention? Do you always need to take credit for team wins? Do you notice your team members holding back, hesitant to disagree or offer new ideas? Do you have a hard time admitting when you don't know something? And finally, do you measure your success based on your own prestige or on the growth of the entire team?
Wow, those are some tough but necessary questions to ask yourself. Any leader should really take the time to reflect on those honestly.
For sure. And if you answer yes to any of them, that's a sign that maybe you need to work on some things, for yourself and as a leader. For example, making decisions on your own all the time, it might seem efficient, but it can come from an inflated ego, and you miss out on all that valuable input from your team, and you don't get their buy-in. Same with getting defensive about feedback. You're basically closing yourself off from growing.
And that whole feeling of being indispensable, that can really hold people back from developing and feeling empowered themselves.
Exactly. When leadership comes from ego, you end up focusing on your own gain or recognition instead of the team as a whole. It undermines the whole idea of a strong collaborative team.
So it's about shifting the focus from me to we.
Exactly. And Almeida probably contrasts those ego-driven tendencies with more autocratic or narcissistic leadership styles. In fact, the course even mentions Tabela 1, Traços de Liderança Autocrática, and Tabela 2, Traços de Liderança Narcisista. Those are tables that lay out those styles so you can do a self-assessment.
So those tables give leaders a way to see if they're maybe falling into those less effective styles.
Yes, and the course even talks about a scoring system for those traits. Lower scores mean you're more collaborative, more empathetic, but very high scores, they suggest a real risk of negative impact. It can even hurt the organization. So it's a way to see where you land on that spectrum.
Self-reflection like that is so valuable. Okay, so beyond identifying potential pitfalls, what are some of the practical tools for empowering people and helping them grow that we might find in Empower Your Team?
Well, the book seems to be aligned with the course, so I'd bet there are a bunch of really useful tools in there. For example, maybe a guía para promover cultura de protagonismo, a guide to, creating a culture of proactivity. That would probably have tips for encouraging autonomy and engagement.
It sounds like something a lot of leaders would find helpful. What else?
Maybe a modelo de comunicación transparente para líder is a model for communicating transparently. It might talk about communicating clearly and authentically and maybe specific ways to give good feedback.
Feedback's so important for growth.
It is, and related to that, maybe a ferramenta de feedback 360 degrees, a 360-degree feedback tool. It would explain how to get anonymous feedback from, different people to help you improve.
Getting different perspectives can be really enlightening. Helps you see things you might miss.
Totally. And there's also mention of a planilla de diagnóstico, a diagnostic spreadsheet. It's on Marcio Almeida's website, Efata Solutions. It's specifically for assessing things like your transformational leadership skills, emotional intelligence, and how well things are aligned strategically in the organization.
So listeners can actually go and assess their own leadership, get a sense of where they stand.
Yeah. And finally, a ferramenta de diagnóstico de motivación y desempeño. It helps you figure out what drives motivation based on neurobehavioral principles, finding those intrinsic motivators and creating personalized incentives.
It's really interesting to see those things combined, psychology and practical tools. Does the course give any real-world examples of how these ideas have been used?
It does. There's this great story about Rodrigo. He was a super skilled technical expert, but he realized that his technical knowledge wasn't enough to really get his team to perform and be engaged. So he started working on his emotional intelligence and focusing on how to motivate people.
And what happened when he shifted his focus like that?
Well, the story shows how creating that kind of supportive environment, where people feel empowered, it can help even the quietest team members shine. In Rodrigo's case, there was this woman, Mariana, who was really reserved. But once she felt like she had the space and support, she started to really thrive. And the whole team became more cohesive, more productive.
It proves that when you empower individuals, the whole team benefits. Now, the course also has this module on lideranza humanizada. That's humanized leadership. What's the main idea behind that approach?
Well, this module really emphasizes that leadership isn't just about power or, your position. It's about connecting with people, building trust. Think about the leaders who have had a big impact on you. It's rarely just their skills, right? It's their ability to connect with you on a human level, to make you feel trusted, to give you a sense of shared purpose.
I completely agree. It's leading with empathy, with a genuine care for your team.
Yeah, and Almeida's work highlights how important a clear purpose is, especially for this kind of humanized leadership. He even talks about how some social responsibility initiatives can actually backfire. If they're not truly connected to the company's core purpose, they can seem fake.
Interesting. So social responsibility shouldn't just be a trend you jump on.
Exactly. The course even asks this thought-provoking question. It asks you to really think about whether your company's social responsibility efforts are actually aligned with their goals or if they're just following the crowd.
That's something every leader should consider. Now, a lot of people wonder, how does this humanized approach to leadership actually affect the bottom line? Does Empower Your Team address that?
Yes, it does, specifically in the argumenta soma logica section of the course, which means argumentation and logic. It explains that when you apply humanized leadership correctly, you get more engagement, people stay longer, and productivity goes up. All those things directly impact the finances of the organization.
So it's not just about being a nice person, it's a strategy for getting better results.
Exactly. Almeida makes it clear that it's about taking action, actually doing things to improve performance, not just having good intentions.
That's an important distinction. Now, I also saw that the course mentions Maslow's hierarchy of needs. How does that fit into empowering teams?
Maslow's hierarchy, it's really helpful for understanding human behavior, says that we all have these needs, starting with, basic survival and safety, and moving up to higher needs like self-actualization and belonging. Almeida's work suggests that sometimes teams, even entire companies, can get stuck on those lower-level needs, and that holds them back from reaching their potential.
And how can transformational leadership help break through that?
Transformational leaders, they get those needs, they can challenge those limiting mindsets and create a culture that supports, real growth and development. It goes beyond just surviving, it's about thriving. By creating an environment where people feel safe, where they have opportunities to learn and contribute and find purpose, leaders can help everyone move towards that higher level of fulfillment. And ultimately, that leads to greater success for the organization.
So it's about creating the conditions for people to really flourish. What are some practical steps that our listeners can take, like right now, to start becoming more transformational leaders themselves?
Well, the course has this roteiro de ações para líderes transformadores. It's like an action plan for transformational leaders. One example is assunto, conexão com a equipe, which means connect with the team. It's about scheduling those active listening sessions, where you really try to understand everyone's strengths and areas for development.
Going back to that idea of the leader being an emotional mirror, right? Really listening to their team. What's another step?
Another one is ação sete, medindo o impacto da transformação, measure the impact of transformation. It stresses the importance of having feedback systems, and choosing clear indicators to track progress. Like, are people collaborating better? Is there more innovation? Are people staying with the company longer? It's not enough to just make changes. You have to check if they're working.
So it's like a data-driven approach to transformation, making sure your efforts are paying off.
Right. And then the final action in the roadmap is ação final, meu compromisso, my commitment. It encourages you to define what kind of impact you want to have as a leader and to really own your development.
That's powerful, owning it. Now, the course also has a FAQ section, right? Are any questions there that relate to the challenges of empowering teams?
Yeah, there are a bunch of really relevant ones. For example, people often ask how to start a cultural transformation. The course says you need a clear vision and everyone needs to be on board. Another common question is how to deal with resistance to change. The course suggests really listening to people's concerns, explaining the benefits clearly, and getting people involved in the process. Then there's the question of how to identify your own blind spots as a leader, the answer. Use 360-degree feedback, do self-assessments, and get some coaching.
Those are all important things when you're trying to empower your team. What other challenges does the FAQ section address?
It also talks about how to build a strong feedback culture. The course suggests having regular feedback sessions, but with a focus on learning and getting better, not just criticizing. Another challenge is getting people on board with a long-term vision. For that, the course recommends connecting that vision to people's personal and professional goals. And finally, there's the question of how to measure the impact of, humanized leadership, which can be tricky. The suggestion there is to use climate surveys, 360-degree feedback, and track key metrics related to engagement.
It sounds like Marcio Almeida has really thought about the real-world hurdles that leaders face when they try to empower their teams. Now, let's talk about strategy. The course mentions tools like the Balanced Scorecard, OKRs, and lean management. How do those fit into this whole goal of empowerment?
Those tools are discussed in the Aplicação de Ferramentas por Líderes Visionários section of the course. That's the application of tools by visionary leaders. And they're really important for helping leaders align their teams, streamline processes, and use resources strategically to get real results. It's not just about following the latest trends. It's about using frameworks that actually work.
Can you give me a quick rundown of, say, the Balanced Scorecard and how it can help empower teams?
Sure. The Balanced Scorecard, or BSC, it basically helps you look at your organization from 4 different angles: finances, customer satisfaction, how well your internal processes are working, and your capacity to learn and grow. And for each area, you set clear objectives and key performance indicators, or KPIs, so you can make sure everyone's daily work is pushing towards those bigger strategic goals. The course people gives an example of Marcos, who worked at an industrial company, and how he used the BSC to link day-to-day tasks with those long-term goals. So his team knew exactly how their work contributed.
So it creates this structure that helps everyone stay focused on the same goals.
Right. And Almeida's work shows how the BSC can help different departments work together better. Like, there's a story about Patricia, who used the BSC to connect investments in team development with improvements in their internal processes. And that led to happier customers. And there's another example with Carlos, who worked at a multinational company. He used the BSC, KPIs, and OKRs to drive their digital transformation, which ended up boosting their online presence and sales. So these tools, they give empowered teams a clear framework to operate within.
They provide the structure, the foundation for empowered teams to thrive. Now, one last thing that stood out to me from the course was this idea of learning to learn, which references the work of Adler and Van Dorn. Why is that skill so important for leaders who want to empower their teams?
Well, Adler and Van Dorn, this is that real learning isn't just passively absorbing information. It's about actively engaging with it. And that's especially important today where we're bombarded with so much information all the time. Leaders need to be able to filter through all that noise and figure out what's really important.
It's about being able to tell what's valuable and what's not.
Exactly. They talked about different levels of reading, from basic understanding to being able to combine ideas from lots of different sources. And that applies to leadership too. There are all these tools like KPIs, OKRs, the balanced scorecard, agile methodologies. Leaders need to go beyond just knowing what they are. They need to develop that critical thinking to really understand them, see if they fit their situation, and adapt them accordingly.
So it's about mastering the art of applying knowledge, not just having it.
Exactly. Good strategic management requires you to understand the context, the culture, the specific challenges. You can't just copy and paste what works somewhere else. You have to tailor those tools to fit your team and your organization.
Makes sense. Now, the course also mentions some ideas from classical philosophy. How are those old ideas still relevant today, especially for empowering teams in such a fast-paced, unpredictable world?
It talks about the value of, the basics, like communication, logic, and rhetoric, drawing on thinkers like Santo Agostino and Santo Masticino. In a world where things change so quickly, being able to communicate clearly, think logically, and persuade and inspire people, well, those are timeless skills for any leader. It's a good reminder that some things never go out of style.
Some principles of leadership are timeless, even if the tools and situations change. Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive into Empower Your Team. We've really explored the core ideas of the book and the related course.
It has been. We've seen how Marshall Almeida combines transformational leadership, neuroscience, practical tools, self-awareness, a human-centered approach, and strategic thinking.
And by applying those ideas, our listeners can gain valuable knowledge and maybe even have a few aha moments of their own as they lead their teams and pursue their goals.
Absolutely. Marcio Almeida is a great resource for anyone who wants to become a better leader. Empower Your Team is a great book, and his Curso de Liderança para Transformação e Inovação provides even more practical guidance. And then there's his consulting, which is a more personalized option. We definitely recommend checking those out if you want to level up your leadership skills.
And speaking of leveling up, in our next deep dive, we'll be looking at another one of Marcel Almeida's books, Unlock Your Team. So join us next time as we delve deeper into team dynamics and how to unlock the full potential of your people.